Good morning and a very special welcome to the final match in the quarterfinal round of the 2026 Public Sector Debate Competition. We're delighted to have you join us here at our offices in Saxthorpe or via our social media platform, YouTube, to those of you joining online. I'm Aniki Clark, Communication Lead here in the TIU. If you're just joining us, you missed the first two matches, right, where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and Teaching Service booked their spot in the semifinals. Which team will join them? Is it Team Proposition, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development, or the Administrator General's Department? Great, they are in to give us a great treat to close out the quarterfinal round of the Public Sector Debate Competition. So let's get to meet them, starting with Team Proposition, Meg ID.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Osborne, and I'm the first speaker for Team Proposition.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shireen Sims Landell. I'm the second speaker.
Good morning. I'm Andrea Jones, reply speaker for the proposition.
Let's give them a round of applause. And let's now get to meet Team Proposition, the Administrator General's Department.
Good morning. My name is Cudian King, and I am the first speaker for Team Proposition.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Lewis, second speaker for Team Opposition.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marissa Moore, third speaker.
Let's give them also a round of applause. Have you noticed that it is all females? Yes! The ladies will be on show this morning, and I'm sure they're going to take us out in fine style, even though I'm accustomed to Kulian being the third speaker on Admin Gen. But let's see how the matchup goes this morning. Let's now listen to the mood that they will be debating. It says, be it resolved that increased civic education would meaningfully improve voter turnout in Jamaica. It's a point that is raging. You know, low voter turnout in Jamaica. How do we get voters to be more engaged in the process, to come out and vote, and not just 30% or 20-odd% determining the government of the day? But judging the match, we have our partners from the Jamaican Association of Debating and Empowerment, and they will introduce themselves.
Good morning, ladies. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and I'll be the chair judge for this round.
Good morning, everyone. Kalisa Tivas. I'll be serving as your wing adjudicator. All the best.
Pleasant morning, everyone. My name is Jerome Reynolds, and I'll also be serving as a wing adjudicator. All the best.
Thank you, judges. And just to say to the teams, that you have got this far is significant, right? You're 70. You've completed 75% of the journey, right? It's just a little way left to go. And we know it's always sad when we have to say goodbye to a really good team. But at this point, all that's left for me to do is to wish you both good luck. And I will enjoy the match from in the audience. I hand over to Ravon, who will marshal this morning's final match.
Thank you very much, Aniki. And indeed, excellent commendations to both teams. The winner from this match, the worst position you can place after winning this match is fourth. And so I know there's a lot at stake here, and I know none of these teams are going for fourth, they're going for all the way. Am I right? All right. And so to govern this debate, we're going to be talking about the Jade Parliamentary Debate format. This format will see the first speakers presenting for 7 minutes. Second speakers, you'll have 6 minutes to present your case, and third and final speakers on either team, you will have 5 minutes. It's important to note that the first and last minute of each speech is what we consider protected time, in which no points of information will be allowed. Outside of those periods of protected time, we encourage points of information. Of course, no points of information will be allowed during the reply speeches. You'll know when you've exited your first minute of protected time because the bell is going to ding once. It's going to sound like this. Wonderful. When you've entered into your second period of protected time, you're going to hear the bell ding once again. That means you have 1 minute left to finish your allocated time. Now, at the end of your allocated time, you're going to hear the bell ding twice. But perhaps you have like 15 seconds and you want to utilize that to kind of like wrap up your final thoughts. We're going to give you that 15 seconds. However, after your allocated time plus 15 seconds, you're going to hear the bell ding continuously. And that means that the judges are no longer listening and you're not scoring any more points. In fact, you're just holding up the debate. All right? Now, between the first sets of speakers, first and second and third, we're going to have 2 pairs of cross-examination respectfully. And we'll talk about those cross-examination pairs when we get to that part of the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, the moot before the House reads once more. Be it resolved that increased civic education would meaningfully improve voter turnout in Jamaica. We invite the first speaker from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development to take the stage. Please make welcome Daniel Osborne.
Good morning, everyone. Panel, why aren't people voting right now? The answer is not simply that people are lazy or uninterested. Many Jamaicans, especially young Jamaicans, do not participate because they do not understand how politics affect their daily lives. They do not know how governments work, and they do not believe their vote makes a difference. That is not character flaws, but instead knowledge gaps. And guess what? Knowledge gaps can be filled. It is a process by which citizens learn about their rights, their responsibilities, and the structure of their everyday lives, giving them the confidence to engage in meaningful democracy. By meaningful improvement, we're not claiming that civic education alone will produce a revolution at the ballot box overnight. We're arguing that it will produce a measurable, statistically significant increase in voter turnout, particularly among young people, by directly removing the knowledge and confidence barriers that are keeping them home on election day. What then is our model? We propose increased civic education that teaches how Jamaica's system of government works, the Constitution and citizens' rights, the rule of law, the responsibilities of elected officials, how public policy affects employment, education, healthcare, housing, and crime, conventional forms of political participation, including not yet voting, and how citizens can effectively make their voices heard. Why is this useful on our side? We think this is useful because politics becomes relevant and consequential to the lives of young persons. Why is this the case? When politics is discussed, young people often hear references to issues such as FinSac, constitutional reform, road to republic, fiscal policy, public debt, and governance structures. However, many of them don't know why these things matter, as they are not able to situate themselves either as beneficiaries or as persons negatively impacted by these policies. So it's not that people don't care, they just don't know why they should care. That is why politics appears distant, irrelevant, and disconnected from their lived experiences. Think about it. If people don't understand the system, why would they participate in it? This phenomenon creates three major barriers in voting. Firstly, people do not understand the political system well enough to engage confidently. Secondly, they do not know what political parties stand for or how to evaluate them. Thirdly, and most critically, they do not believe their participation can influence outcomes. Why does this change in our world? This changes because we are better able to connect persons to the political establishment by using their value that they extol in respect to their own lives. So that is to say, they are better able to appreciate how much of an impact their political choices not yet can have on their own life chances. The meaningful change happens at the point at which people understand not only why they should vote, but how their votes actually matter and the ways in which they are able to create shifts in society toward the outcome they desire. The opposition may argue that civic education campaigns already exist and are not producing results. However, our model carries distinct strategic advantages that the opposition cannot replicate. Early intervention through schools. This campaign is geared toward infiltrating high schools, enabling early intervention to combat partisan socialization that occurs at home. Young, impressionable minds can be engaged and shaped before entrenched political apathy sets in. The opposition does not have the benefit of socializing minds from the outset. By reaching young persons early, we on this side are able to connect them to political establishment through the values they hold in their own lives, thereby helping them appreciate how much political choices affect their life chances. Increased civic education in the format we propose transforms voting from an obligation to a meaningful act by connecting political decisions to everyday life. Young people are far more likely to vote when they understand that elections directly shape their ability to find jobs, access healthcare, use public transportation, afford the cost of living, and feel safe in their communities. When politics becomes connected to daily concerns, participation becomes essential rather than optional, and youth voices feel valued rather than ignored. Beyond relevance, civic education equips young people to navigate political landscape with confidence. Many do not know what political parties stand for or how to distinguish between competing policies, leaving them disengaged or easily swayed by personalities and inherited party loyalty. The Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network found that trust in government among young people averaged just 46%, with corruption, lack of transparency, and the influence of money in politics cited as major concerns. Of course, civic education certainly cannot fix corruption, but it trains citizens to identify it, reject it at the ballot box, and demand better. We must acknowledge the fact that the absence of civic education has massive social and political costs. When citizens are not properly civically educated, voter turnout declines. Young people disengage from democracy. Political decisions are made by a shrinking segment of the population. Governments become less representative, and citizens are less able to hold leaders accountable. The cost, my opponents, is not merely low turnout. The cost is weaker democracy. We do not dismiss challenges of party corruption, electoral disillusionment, or logistical barriers that may lead to low voter turnout. But we say this on our side. Civic education is the prerequisite that makes all other reforms meaningful. You cannot demand better governance if you do not first understand what good governance looks like. You cannot reject corruption at the ballot box if you have never been taught that the ballot box is yours to use. Address the knowledge deficit first, and citizens become equipped to tackle every other barrier that follows. On our side, increased civic education creates informed citizens who understand the stakes, understand their power, and therefore have a greater incentive to participate in elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel Osborne, first speaker from Team Meg ID. At this point in time, we invite the first speaker from the Administrator General's Department. Please make welcome Cudian King.
I can go? Okay. Adjudicators, speakers, audience, a pleasant morning to you. Mr. Speaker, after decades of civil education in Jamaica, voters' turnout has dropped from 53% to a measly 37% in just 9 years. If civic education worked, turnout would be increasing and not going down. Mr. Speaker, we're targeting the wrong problem. The issue here is not knowledge. It is what the propositioners agree with me and said. It is political trust. And Mr. Speaker, we don't teach political trust. We perform political trust. Now, the proposition's arguments are unsupported and fail to address the real cause of voter turnout. They said that the people are politically ignorant and they lack confidence. But which poll? Which country, Mr. Speaker? This is Jamaica, where we have had the PMP and the JLP, the two-partisan system, for a very long time. This is where our grandmother was PMP, so the grandchild becomes PMP, and so the daughter is expected to become PMP. We know how to vote. We know how to mark a ballot. that our lack of confidence doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from political trust and lack of performance. Mr. Speaker, team proposition also spoke about early intervention in civics as if this is something new and not something that has been done. But I'm asking now, so we have early intervention, right? And we start to teach them civics from 4th grade. When are these 4th graders going to vote? Our voters' turnout is currently dismal. It is at a crisis level. We have over 60% of citizens not voting. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me frame this debate for you. We must first define the key terms. Civic education refers to formal teaching about how government operates, the role of citizens, the structure of parliament, the function of the EOJ, and the process of voting. Meaningful can be defined as significant, purpose, and have value, while meaningful improved is defined as a significant sustained increase done in a timely manner that signal real change. Voters' turnout is the behavioral outcome of citizens deciding whether to participate in an election. Now, Mr. Speaker, for context, a meaningful improvement would see us looking at numbers, albeit not in isolation. Moving from a historical 39% voters' turnout in 2025, a meaningful improvement will look at a minimum 45% voters' turnout, which in numbers, Mr. Speaker, translates to 95,000 more Jamaicans showing up on election day. Context, Mr. Speaker, also matters significantly as it is crucial in boosting civic education, particularly among 18 to 40 years old, aiming at a sustainable impact over the decades. Now, on to my substantives. My first claim. Mr. Speaker, not now. The knowledge is already ingrained in schools, in society, but that knowledge has not been changing behavioral pattern. Jamaica has maintained universal suffrage in 1944 and has regularly conducted elections. This is because citizens are exposed to civic discourse. Mr. Speaker, what currently obtains is that civics has never been restricted by the government. It has always been in schools, in social programs, with even some schools opting to merge it with subjects like social study. Now, what has obtained? Mr. Speaker, Jamaicans' voters' turnout fell from 48.3% in 2016 to just 37.1% in 2020 during the pandemic. In 2025, a normal year, only 39.5% of Jamaicans voted. Mr. Speaker, this pattern continued across the Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago, voters' turnout fell from 70% in 2010 to 57% in 2020. And Barbados also saw a tremendous decline, despite civic education remaining in school. Go ahead.
The data that you're logging across the Caribbean was for the same reasons why the decline occurred?
I think that is what our speech is answering. The decline occur for behavioral pattern reason that stems from corruption, stems from political trust, but it most definitely did not stem from lack of ignorance or not knowing civics. As I was saying, because despite this decline, Mr. Speaker, civics has remained in school in Barbados and in Trinidad. When citizens understand the voting process, Mr. Speaker, but still stays home, the problem is not lack of education. It is a behavioral pattern embedded after decades of dealing with the same unanswered issues. That hopelessness has now been transferred to the younger voters, also creating a behavioral pattern in that demography. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't matter where you put the knowledge or how you put the knowledge, because the knowledge in and of itself is not affecting behavioral pattern. And so an increase in civic education while Jamaica is at crisis level for voters' turnout is preposterous. My second claim, Mr. Speaker, the underlying issue is that voter turnout is driven by trust and not just knowledge. Political science research across demography shows a consistent pattern. Turnout correlates strongly with political trust, efficiency, and belief that voting matters. It correlates weakly with raw civics knowledge. The issue is not ignorance, but rather dissatisfaction with the outcome. And this is not just a Jamaican story. Not now, you already got one. This is a global pattern backed by data. OZE 2023 OECD worldwide study found that low trust in parliament combined with corruption and inequality is a sufficient condition reason for low voters' turnout. His conclusion was simple. Trust in Parliament affects political participation. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica has proved this point. A 2022 laptop survey found that only 28% of Jamaicans trust political party. And Don Anderson's recent 2025 post-election poll found that 58% of non-voters stayed home because they did not like the direction the country was going in. Taking together these findings, Mr. Speaker, voters are not confused about where to put the X. They believe that their X no longer makes a difference. Similar patterns in Trinidad and Barbados, where declining turnout have followed a period of political scandals, economic hardship, and voters' fatigue. Mr. Speaker, team opposition is not arguing that civic education is useless. Our position is increasing civic education as the main strategy to a meaningful improve voter turnout, misdiagnose the problem. Mr. Speaker, if a doctor treats for cancer with just Panadol, the cancer spread and your chances of survival wither away. We're facing a grave issue, and mere civic education is an ineffective dosage for a solution. The opposition pauses.
Thank you very much. That was Cudian King from the Administrator General's Department. At this point in time, we're going to enter into our first period of cross-examination. This segment will see the teams asking and answering questions of each other. Each question is limited to 10 seconds, and each answer is limited to 45 seconds. Of note, for the team that is asking the question, only one person may do so at a time. However, for the team that is answering the question, the entire team can chime in to provide the most robust answer to that question. So, to start off this period of cross-examination, we will first invite team opposition to pose their questions.
Civic education will most definitely address trust, because as you have demonstrated in your argument, that trust is what's driving the process now, and trust has equal to low voter turnout. Civic education will drive knowledge in that respect, and then persons will be more accountable to the people, because now the people know what to look out for, and from that, they can decide whether or not the parties are trustworthy.
My opponent, since trust didn't come from them not knowing what they're looking for, if someone already knows how election work or choose not to vote, how would more civic education change their behavior?
What was that? Repeat?
Repeat.
I'm not hear the question. Speak clearly so I can answer.
My opponent, if someone already knows how election work or chooses not to vote, how would more civic education change their behavior?
Okay, clearly, because civics is not about teaching you how to vote. That is only one element of the process, and the electoral office already has that happening. Civics goes much further in terms of outlining structure, governance, rule of law, your role in the democratic process. It involves in your constitutional rights, what to expect, what not to expect. And it then teaches you as well how to respond to the processes that are happening. It gives the people power.
Makes them more informed and educated.
Your third question?
Yeah. My opponent, you want to ask how does not lack of knowledge breed the distrust? Is it distrust from lack of performance? How does the people doesn't trust what they don't know?
And you're clearly answering the moods on our side, because if you're not aware of what to expect, how can you trust something? You have to be knowledgeable, and this is where civics plays the role, because it outlines the entire system. It's not just about voting. Voting process is quite easy. You learn that it's written. What are you voting for? And this is where civics comes in.
All right, thank you very much. We now invite the three questions from Team Mega ID.
Okay. My first question, the opposition claimed that civic education already exists in Jamaica and it has not worked. But my question, if a patient is given insufficient dose of medicine and does not recover, do we conclude that the medicine does not work or does it?
Time for your question, your answer.
We do conclude that, because thank you for asking, if as a patient over the years they've been giving me a medicine and that medicine hasn't worked, it's time to change the medicine. My opponent, I see that you're tying political trust here, and you're saying that you can teach political trust. You still have not showed us the correlation as to how trust translates more in knowledge and not performance. Because we put it to you that this is Jamaica, and in Jamaica we know how to vote, we know who to vote for, because the two-partisan system has existed since the beginning of the electoral process. And so we have all that idea, we know who to vote out, which is why we vote in JP and PNP sometimes, depending on the economic and social climate of the country. So it is not knowledge. What we are asking you is how then do you influence political trust, because you cannot teach it, you have to perform it.
So are you saying the democratic process and functions in an uninformed population is effective?
Mr. Speaker, Jamaica is not an uninformed population, don't be that to us. I mean, let's give the DOJ some credit, let us give the government some credit for the relaunch of civics for the various social programs. Even in the election that just passed, we saw various campaigns teaching people how to vote and telling them that their vote is important, and we know that because at one point in time we've seen 84% of Jamaicans voted. So we understand that our vote is important. It's just that right now we don't have nothing to vote for, because decades later we're tired, we are fatigued, we need other options, we need more and better performance.
And we also add that the Electoral Office of Jamaica has meaningful ways of teaching the populace what to do, and they start their campaigns as early as 9 months before elections.
Again, I'm hearing that voting is a matter of trust, and the Electoral Commission, is that your definition of democracy?
What?
I didn't get the question.
You're giving them the opportunity to repeat?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Is your definition of democracy a process of voting whether or not you are knowledgeable of what your vote is responsible for or accountable to?
My opponents, let's stay on par with the argument, right? We are not saying that voting is our definitions for democracy. What we're saying is that in a democratic state, we understand that our vote matters. It is the reason why we voted before. But now there is a severely low voters turnout because of other reasons that doesn't have to do with ignorance or lack of education. It is because of political trust and voters fatigue. And you guys have agreed with us with political trust. But what you are recommending is to give us more civics to fix political trust. And we're repeatedly saying that civics doesn't fix political trust. We are already saying that the people are patriarchal. We're saying that they're confident. We're saying that they understand the voting process, and we must correct performance.
Thank you very much for that first period of cross-examination. Can we give both teams a round of applause? A spicy start to the debate indeed. At this point in time, we invite the second speaker from Team Meg ID. Please make welcome Shireen Sims Landell.
Distinguished panelists, worthy opponents, ladies and gentlemen, good day. As a second speaker, my task is simple. I will take the psychological foundation my colleague just established and ground it firmly in the hard, everyday realities of the Jamaican electorate. But let me speak to something a first speaker would have indicated. The opposition first speaker is clearly misaligned with what is happening on the ground. Civic education was removed over 20 years ago and only recently returned. This debate will dismantle the opposition pessimistic narrative by defending our two final burdens.
Firstly, how civic education systematically dismantles voting tribalism, and secondly, how it serves as the ultimate catalyst to activate our massive disengaged youth demographic. Let us look closely at the political landscape of our country and be completely honest. The opposition claims that people stay away from polls because the system is corrupt or clientism not entertained. But I ask you, why does clientism survive? It survives when an electorate is starved of formal civic literacy. Therefore, the criteria for choosing a leader defaults to immediate, short-term material gain or blind generational party loyalty. Mr. Speaker, when citizens do not understand how to evaluate a political manifesto, how to audit a national budget, or how to measure the performance of a member of parliament against their constitutional mandate, then, Mr. Speaker, not entertained, voting becomes transactional. It becomes a short-term favor, a cash payout where 5,000 is wrapped in a T-shirt or inherited political loyalty. And what happens to the massive demographic of unaligned intellectual Jamaicans? Mr. Speaker, they look at the transactional circus and they become disgusted and stay home. Let me point out that the low voter turnout we see today is a direct protest against uneducated politics. We believe that civic education is the antidote to this disease. Mr. Speaker, by introducing robust civic literacy, we train our citizens in critical political analysis. We teach them that a politician's job is not to give personal favor, but to craft systemic policy. For example, a lot of people view MPs as glorified social workers, as opposed to people who legislate. Educating citizens against this will lead to a reduction and possibly elimination of vote buying and corrupt acts during election periods. My opponents, when you educate the masses to demand policy over pork barrel politics, you completely elevate the national democratic discourse. Mr. Speaker, suddenly the non-voter who stayed home out of disgust realized that the ballot box has become a place of intellectual accountability. By eradicating the tribal default, civic education brings the disillusioned majority back to the polling vote. This brings me directly to our final point, the salvation of democracy, the youth. Mr. Speaker, data from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica in 2025 consistently reveals a terrifying trend. The lowest voter turnout in our country sits squarely within the 18 to 35 demographic. Mr. Speaker, hundreds of thousands of young Jamaicans who are eligible to participate remain disconnected from the political process and are choosing silence. The opposition look at this and say, they just don't care. We on the proposition say, how can they care about a system they were never taught to own? Democratic participation is a habit. Mr. Speaker, it is a muscle that must be trained. Under our current system, a young person turns 18, finishes high school, enters the workforce or university, and is suddenly expected to participate in election without having a structured, non-partisan conversation about why their vote matters. They are left to the mercy of social echoes and partisan noise. Mr. Speaker, we also see older persons who disenfranchise the younger persons. Mr. Speaker, we will teach them that universal adult suffrage wasn't a gift. It was a hard-fought victory won by blood and sweat of our ancestors in 1994. Mr. Speaker, the opposition would have you believe that Jamaica's low voter turnout is a terminal illness that education cannot cure. Do not buy into their narrative of defeat. Mr. Speaker, socioeconomic struggles and corruptions are real, but Mr. Speaker, we will wake the sleeping giant by teaching the transactional voter to demand better and to give you, the young voter, the tools to enforce it. I rest my case.
Thank you very much. We now invite the second speaker from Team Administrator General's Department. Please make welcome Jessica Lewis.
Good morning. Let me stop proposition in their tracks when making erroneous claims that there are knowledge gaps and that they hope to fix. Please note that we already saw in the last election that there were safe seats that flipped. And so the people know already that when they see a problem, they need to go out and vote. That is not an issue. The problem is not that they do not care. What they care about is that they are fatigued from the reality that they face, the reality that they live in. Further, their approach is flawed, as in 2022, a study showed from civic education in high school and voter turnout in adulthood, there was no actual correlation because there was a null relationship between civic education and turnout. The best case scenario it was found is that any civic education effects that will exist are likely very small. The idea that proposition has put forward that additional civics training will help to substantially elevate voter turnout is overly optimistic. That said, let us now continue to administer doses of reality. Voter turnout and participation is better influenced by the actual actions of members of political parties. Jamaicans feel disillusioned by unfulfilled promises and ineffective leadership, causing disengagement with the electoral process. Increased education will not fix this. The respective governments must endeavor to make good on their promises laid out in their manifestos. Promises made must be promises kept. It's one thing, my opponents, to know what should happen, and they do, but it's another thing to see it in practice, and what they see is lacking. The 2026 BTI Transformation Not Accepted Index report supported this when they said that the lack of response is due to the population's needs not being met and politicians being out of touch with the Jamaican society. The report noted the voting populace is focused on topical issues such as absenteeism by elected officials, matters of non-compliance, duplication of services that squander resources, and unaccounted for government spending. This is what meaningfully affects voter turnout. The people are closely watching what the government's responses to Hurricane Melissa impacts. Young people are watching their ability to become homeowners in the future. We are watching the findings of the Integrity Commission and the Auditor General's report, and what they see is telling, that too from both sides. So what is the solution? Increased accountability from parliamentarians is required. Having proper assessment methods in place for officials during their term can meaningfully increase the voter turnout far better than an increased civic education. Next, Mr. Speaker, it's time for the IV to hit straight into the bloodstream. Increased civic education is merely a smokescreen to hide gaping wounds in the Jamaican reality caused by corruption. You say that civic education cannot fix corruption, and you want us to train us to understand how to go out and change it. But education cannot be the priority, because the Jamaican people cannot be expected to blindly exercise their franchise just because they know how they should while they exist in a corrupted society. Education cannot be your first priority. A Capri study entitled A Landscape Assessment of Political Corruption in Jamaica noted that corruption breaks the link between collective decision-making and people's power to influence through voting, the very link that defines democracy. That report directly links low voter turnout to the perceptions of corruption. And in 2026, please note that the GDP has fell 5% due to said corruption. You cannot ignore that, and you cannot think education is going to change that. Any link between a proposed increase in civic education and a higher voter turnout is thus broken by the many intervening acts of corruption. So what ought we do instead? An increased support by watchdog entities, increased transparency and communication with the population, such as full awareness and utilization of the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, interaction with members of parliament in and out of season. That will better the Jamaican experience and better improve voter turnout than merely increasing civic education. So now let's enter the recovery phase. Attention should be focused on correcting the inadequacies of the voting process on a whole, rather than increasing civic education. Having enhanced accessibility to the stations, utilizing mobile polling stations are ways to increase voter turnout, as the process itself is seen as more flexible, less time-consuming, and an overall more productive use of time. The voting process itself can be seen as cumbersome, tedious, and painstaking, with many opting out, even if they wanted to exercise their franchise as they are taught in Proposition's world. Many of the disabled community and the elderly still in 2026 face a challenge to vote in Jamaica, as they spend an entire day for a chance just to cast a ballot. Reform allows for the prospects of an improved system, equaling an improved response that translates to an improved turnout. So in conclusion, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But anyway, me take it, maka juke me. The Jamaican reality cannot fathom Proposition's proposal to increase civic education as a way to meaningfully increase voter turnout when faced with continued disappointments, high levels of corruption, and weak electoral systems. This cannot be the answer. Low voter turnout must have a multifaceted response. Ladies and gentlemen, do not place a band-aid on a gaping wound. Administer the right medication before the proposition left with for dead. Opposition pauses.
Thank you very much, Jessica Lewis. Second speaker from Team Admin GD. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now in the second period of cross-examination. The rules remain largely the same. However, this time we'll invite Team in Proposition, Meg ID, to pose their questions first.
Thank you, judges. Second speaker just said blindly expressing your votes is better than being educated, and the solution is an accountability system. Who will drive this accountability system in your world if the voters are blind?
My opponents, what I said, they cannot be expected to blindly follow the system when they live within a corrupted system. What they're taught in school is not the reality that they face. To answer your question as to who will drive accountability, what will drive the change is increasing the support of watchdog entities. It will be through the inclusion of the members of parliament, speaking to them, not only when it's election time, but as I said, in and out of season. There's something called the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal that the Jamaicans can go in to see what is happening in their society, what the policies are, to be able to hold each other, hold the politicians, elected officials accountable. That is what is going to change, and that is what is going to help it over, rather than increase civic education. Because education is not coming.
If the distrust of political parties are the real barriers, then we agree the problem is attitudinal. What changes attitude more effectively than education?
My opponent, I would have already shown you this, that change in the political system and performance is what is directly linked to attitude in terms of political participation. Knowledge does not change attitude. Knowledge does not change behavioral patterns, because the problem was not knowledge to begin with. And we're not saying that ignorant voters should just go out and vote because they can exercise their franchise. We're saying that young people in a technological and digitation era, we are aware of the democratic process, we are aware of patriotism and confidence of the political system. What we are is voters fatigue. What we have is voters apathy, and we bring statistics to support and push on those points. That non-voters are saying that they're not voting because they don't like the direction the country is going in.
Okay, and you constantly reply that the voters do not like the decision, don't like the direction that the vote is.
The country is going.
Let me start over, please. Yes, you continuously say that the population is not in favor of the direction that the country is going, and the accountability framework was established through civics. Now, how do you say that civics cannot work if the framework you are referring to came from civical education?
Not true. The accountable framework that we're speaking does not come from civic education. There was a relaunch of a 2023 new civic education that our proposition even failed to mention. And from that civic education, all that is stated is that the intention is to teach us as individuals that we're endowed with rights and ability. And I'm saying schools have kept that. There have been no restriction against that. That is merging subjects like sociology and social studies that are mandatory in school. So the knowledge, again, is there. Our problem is that the knowledge is not translating. And you haven't suggested anything to us, really, outside of early intervention. So I don't know if we wait until the next 5 or 6 elections, the next 20 years, to correct our current dismal voter turnout. We have over 60% of the country not coming out to vote.
All right, thank you very much. We now invite 3 questions from the Administrator General's department.
Ready? Oh, I don't know. So the current civics education emphasizes cultural identity, heritage, values, and citizenship. Which specific unit teaches the practical skills necessary for voter registration, candidate evaluation, and election participation?
And auditing budgets.
And auditing budgets. Self-safe.
Yeah. So what exists on paper is not being necessarily delivered effectively or at the scale required. What currently exists is a fragmented version, it's inconsistently taught, and it rarely connects political systems to students' lived realities. We are not calling for more of the same. We are essentially calling for a more structured, a more meaningful civic education that is standardized, resource, and community-facing. I had mentioned in my first speech that our proposed increased civic education teaches how Jamaica's system of government works, the Constitution and its citizens, the rule of law, the responsibilities of elected officials, how public policy affects employment, education, healthcare, and housing, and a myriad of other things. So it's not just about...
It's not a subject.
Right, you know, it's not about just what to do to vote, where there are a myriad of topics that have been taught.
In our model.
In our model.
Go ahead. My opponents, maybe you need to recheck the statistics, but we will continue. How would civic education overcome the perception among some voters that politicians make promises but fail to deliver after elections?
Civic education would actually train and teach them to become more critical analysis and to perform critical analysis and assess their politicians against objective measures and whether or not they are actually performing what they were required to do. So civic education will lead to a more informed, educated electorate who demand accountability from the politicians.
And we'll move away from just having an accountability framework that's designated and can be considered partisan depending on which government is in power. So having empowered people, having the knowledge to know when things are going right or wrong, moving away from just trust based off feelings and partisan politics is what civics education will do.
My opponents say the voters understand exactly how the system works, but they dislike every available option and what they see. How would civic education increase their likelihood of voting when they know already what is being taught and because it's in the curriculum already?
It's not a subject matter.
Civics is not a subject matter.
Subject.
It's something that drives the whole politics in tandem with civic duties. So it's a broader scope than just going out to vote. What are you voting for? Why is your vote worthy? That is a system. It's a democratic system that we are participating, one that's effective. And civics will then serve as the driver to make the necessary changes where the politicians are not complying with what is required under their governance structure.
So it's not going to be a CXC subject only.
All right, thank you very much. We are now at the part of the debate where we will hear from the two reply speakers. 1-minute pause to conclude, after which we'll invite the opposition reply speaker, followed by the reply speaker from proposition. Your 1-minute break starts now. All right, thank you very much. At this point in time, we invite the final speaker from the Administrator General's Department. Please make welcome Marissa Moore.
All protocols observed. Adjudicators, at this point, I'm sure you've already decided that side opposition has won this debate due to our irrefutable arguments, impeccable questions, and astute answers. But if that's not enough, as a reply speaker, I will undoubtedly make it clearer than a politician's promise after Election Day. Mr. Speaker, low voter turnout is an urgent and pressing matter that requires an equally urgent and pressing solution. And the truth is, even if we took side opposition at their best, their solution, like it already does, will see minimal increase, if any at all, on the impact of voter turnout. Mr. Speaker, the motion calls for us to decide what would have a meaningful impact on voter turnout. And we have decidedly proven to you that increased civic education is not the solution. The weak arguments advanced by side proposition weren't enough to stand in this debate. And here's how they clash up with our much stronger arguments. First of all, civic education was never removed by the government. Civics has always been in somewhat shape or form a part of our curriculum in our schools, a part of our social studies exercises, a part of our everyday discourse since universal suffrage. Also, Team Proposition wants to let you know that knowledge gaps exist in the Jamaican people. We don't know how politics are and how politics work, and that is the reason why people are not voting, because we don't know. We just don't know. That is what they're saying. But our first and second speaker make it quite clear. It is not a knowledge issue. It's a behavioral issue. We know how to vote. Last election was quite clear, as second speaker says, because we see where persons realize that exercising their right equally led to seats being flipped. So we know how to vote. We know how to use our voice. The proposition also says that civic education is a prerequisite that after it reforms meaningful impact. So it is a prerequisite to reform meaningful impact. But the mood calls for more civic education to be the one that causes the meaningful impact in the voter turnout. So we're not setting the pace for civics and then hopefully some kind of reform can take place eventually. That is not so. Also, proposition says that civics teaches us how to, to audit manifesto. I never know that civics did that, so you have to enlighten me on that later on. All right, speakers, let me move on. Mr. Speaker, we showed you that Jamaica does not have a knowledge problem, but a behavioral one. Jamaicans are already exposed to civics through long-standing democratic practice and a curriculum that consistently teaches civic responsibility and processes in some way, shape, or form. Mr. Speaker, Jamaicans understand how the system works. We understand that what constituencies are. We know how to vote. We know about the role of the electoral bodies. So the issue is not a lack of information. The opposition's core point is quite simple. Low voter turnout is a trust problem. Across Jamaica and other comparable democracies, studies show that people do not stay home because they lack civic education. They stay home because they believe the system is unresponsive, corrupt, and irrelevant to their lives. Mr. Speaker, we gave you statistics from studies and polls conducted showing that low trust and dissatisfaction is the driving factor that influences voter turnout. Mr. Speaker, teaching more civics cannot fix lived experiences of neglect or broken promises. Mr. Speaker, if you know psychology, you know that a cognitive behaviorist would tell you that our behavior is shaped by our thought patterns. And Mr. Speaker, politicians have etched a pattern of distrust deep into the minds of Jamaicans. And more civic education will not erase that scar. So, Mr. Speaker, until leaders replace broken promises with visible accountability, until oversight is more than a slogan, and until reform makes participation meaningful to the lives of the Jamaican people, the people will not come out to vote. They will not return to the polls. They will continue to retreat, not out of ignorance, ladies and gentlemen, but out of principle. The opposition rests.
And finally, to conclude this debate, we invite the third and final speaker from Team Proposition. Please make welcome Andrea Jones.
Thank you. You see, in order to emancipate Jamaicans from mental slavery where they associate voting with trust, we need to increase civic education so that the persons will become empowered to know that voting is not just about marking an X, it's about exercising your constitutional, civic, and political rights. And I hope my opponents can take note of that in terms of what civics is, because your translation has been limited to a civical process and not civics in its entirety. We, the proposition, we have clearly demonstrated, and yes, we accept that Jamaica faces challenges with decline in voter participation. However, we stand on the ground that increased civic education, not the civic education that's happening now, but an increased level, which we have identified the different levels, the different scopes, the different avenues, that will allow people to be empowered, informed, and engaged. They will then begin to understand their rights, the evolution of their rights coming from universal adult suffrage in 1944. I mean, Jamaica led the forefront of voting in 1944 up to 1962 when we got independence. We were the country that allowed voting to spread across the Caribbean. We increased our voters list to 1,000%, and the voting was over 90%. Civics was being taught in school up to the 1990s as a standalone. It was being taught through communities. It was being taught through a whole avenue of interventions and not just school. And up to the 1990s, voter turnouts were 80 to 90%. When civics exited formally and was now incorporated into social sciences and other matters, that's when we began to see a decline. Now look, Vision 2030 is the motto by which we're operating. That's less than 4 years away. Voter turnout at less than 40% for the country that led this process in the Caribbean cannot be accepted under no circumstances. We need to remind persons where they're coming from, why they need to vote. It's not about casting the X, it's about the democratic process. It is your constitutional right. It is a right that was fought for. And we need to understand and move away from partisan politics. Because voters, we must accept, we have prospective voters, reflective voters, and tribal voters. Increasing civic education will increase the output of these prospective and these reflective who are looking at processes, who are looking at the failed political representation that they have received. And then they will be more attuned into how they can step into the process, how they can participate, why they need to register. After the 2025 elections, a lot of newspaper articles are out there. Young person says their vote doesn't matter. They see the politicians at a certain point in time. They are not aware that they're not voting for a president or a prime minister. They're voting for their elective representative, their member of parliament. They have certain duties and obligations to be met. Once you're on the voters list, you have a say. You can call on things. You can demand action. They're not aware because civics education has been merged with social sciences that tells you about history and Columbus and all manner of things that we don't associate with. So, my dear opponents, civic education, as we said, is the prerequisite that makes all other forms of reform meaningful. There is indeed, where am I? Talking about, yes, so as I said, the younger population in terms of the whole demographic makeup, we have seen an increase even since 2025, an increase in the younger voters being registered because they want to have a say. In 2030, the persons who are leaving high school will be now eligible to vote. We need to capture their minds. We need to teach them. We need to bring Jamaica back. We need to maintain the history and the foundation from which we are coming from and demonstrate this through an increased level of civic education, not the basic level that we are right now. This will undoubtedly increase and make a meaningful change in voter turnout because you have proven that trust is what we're operating on, and trust has driven low, continuously, voter turnout. We need to move from that. We need to have an educated population, an empowered population that will drive good governance, and that is the reason why we're voting. We're not voting for favors, we are voting for democracy. And I think we rest.
I should ask the question, who you're voting for? Is it the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development or the Administrator General's Department? Okay, so that was a very interesting match, I think, and the teams did well, so let's give them a round of applause. We heard some solid proposals, some solid arguments, and the judges will decide which team advances to the final slot in the semifinals on June 23rd. Thank you, teams. The judges will now deliberate and in about 15 or so minutes come back to announce the winners. It's your final walk in this phase of the competition. It was an all-female clash, and it certainly was a good clash. But, yes. For those of you online, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well done, ladies. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have just concluded the final match in the quarterfinals of this staging of the public sector debate competition. The move before the House read, be it resolved that increased civic education would meaningfully improve voter turnout in Jamaica. So how did the judges see this debate? Well, we understood coming out from Team MegID, particularly coming out of Daniel, the importance of civic education. She contends that the real reason why we're seeing such low voter turnout is because of a lack of knowledge. And she paints it in a very nuanced and interesting way. She says that the problem is that we simply don't see how our vote and the things that we vote for meaningfully impact our lives. She contends that inasmuch as there is a distinction or a segregation between there, that linkage doesn't exist, that is the reason why we have that low voter turnout. She tells us that if we teach individuals about the things, about how important it is that they vote, how important it is that they look at manifestos, how important it is that they hold politicians accountable, and how doing that directly affects them, then there will be an increased interest in voter turnout. And we do that, she contends, through the vehicle of civic education. She goes a little bit further and explains this nuanced and interesting idea that what we really need to do is to introduce civic education at a much earlier level. The justification Daniel contends is so that we can try to break that kind of partisan socialization that happens in the home from young. She contends that if we do that, then what we can do is essentially groom these young individuals to have a greater appreciation of civic education, and therefore how it is that civic education will teach them how what they're doing in terms of the political landscape affects them. And then that she contends, is definitely going to help to address the issue that it is that we're happening. We think that is very good. We think that's a very interesting and nuanced way to paint how civic education will solve for the problem, and we love that very much. We get then coming out from first opposition, QDN King. QDN tells us that the problem is not education. The problem isn't that we don't understand how to do the thing. The problem is that when we do the thing, we don't see any material outcomes. She contends that the bigger problem is political trust. She tells us that the problem is that inasmuch as we do not trust our politicians, they've proven time and time again that they are corrupt. They've proven time and time again that they don't operate in a meaningful way. At this point in time, I think it's very important for me to just pause 1 second and just point out that the views expressed by the debaters are for the purpose of critical thinking and engagement, and not necessarily how they feel. They've been randomly assigned these positions to debate a motion or a mood that is critically important. With that said, QDN says they're corrupt, right? She says that the issue isn't that civic education, and she points out something that we think was brilliantly pointed out, and it was really a question that we had for the remainder of the debate. How does knowledge lead to trust? Civic education, she contends, does not intuitively lead to trust, and her problem, and the problem that team opposition has for the entirety of the debate, is that they don't see the linkage, and they don't see the linkage happening. She contends that the real issue is a lack of turnout because of a lack of trust, lack of efficiencies, and she cited evidence, statistical evidence of that. She tells us that 58% of people stayed home because their vote don't matter, and only 28% of people actually trust the parties, and she contends that is the biggest problem. We think that there are two ways that team proposition should have responded to this particular idea. Recall now that there's a central clash here. Proposition is contending that the problem is a lack of knowledge, and more specifically, how the lack of what they're doing is going to affect the individual, how their vote actually affects them personally, the price of rice, how they get health care, that kind of thing, that kind of knowledge is missing, and we need to teach them that linkage, and then we get great outcome. That directly contradicts against QDN's contention that we know, it's just that we don't think it is going to change anything. We think that that answer is something that needed to have been answered by team proposition. There are two ways. Is the problem really trust? Team proposition seems to concede that the problem is trust, and then they claim that knowledge solves for trust. Fine, that's one way to do it, But if you're going to operate that way, you have to actually prove how knowledge leads to trust. We don't get that kind of linkage, and we think that's critically important. This is particularly important because coming up next, we hear from the second speaker from team opposition rather, a hammering home of this idea of a lack of trust. She goes a little bit further and mechanizes to a great extent what we got from QD and how it is that this lack of trust occurs. They tell us that because politicians particularly keep on doing these bad things, it just continues leading to this kind of apathy. We vote out one party, vote in another party, the same thing happens, and so we become apathetic, we don't care. Jessica also points out a really interesting idea. She says that just because I know how something works doesn't mean that I will do the thing. She tells that the corruption is far too bad, and in fact there are mechanisms that exist already for us to hold our politicians accountable, like the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, and we're not utilizing it. She says that's what we need to be doing, and the reason why we're not doing it is because we simply don't trust our politicians, and more importantly, until our politicians do something that shows that they are deserving of our trust, no amount of civic education is going to solve for it. That's a brilliant piece of argumentation we think coming out from Jessica. Those kind of arguments we want to hear direct contestation to. We don't get that to a meaningful extent. Other interesting ideas that came out in the debate, this matter of urgency. Team opposition contends that the policy that we take from proposition in a best case scenario is going to take time. That is the unique characterization that we got from Daniel about teaching civics early in school and that leading to some greater outcomes. They contend, opposition, that we need to solve the problem now. Not necessarily, like it would be good if we could solve the problem now, but in as much as we can't solve the problem now, maybe we can solve the problem 20 years in the future when these young individuals grow up, that we've taught the civic education and actually care about what it is that they're doing. Maybe 20 years in the future when they become politicians, we can solve the problem. So we don't necessarily think like urgency is like critically need to solve it now, but even then they make an even if analysis and say, even if judges panel we were to buy that this is something that you will accept, it still doesn't lead to the outcome that they want. We think that's very advanced and critical debating. And so, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this match, the score separating the team, 14 points. A meaningful distinction indeed. The winning team scores 288 points to the non-winning team's 274 points. The team that wins this match and will be joining the teaching service, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and whomever wins the other match that is going on right now, the Accountant General's Department, the last semi-finalist in this competition is the Administrator General's Department. So the Accountant General's Department, the Administrator General's Department, 2 AGDs, joined by Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the Teaching Service. Commendations as well to the Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development. An amazing run in this competition. Applaud our quarterfinalists, ladies and gentlemen. The best debater from this match comes to us from the winning team, and that is the second speaker, Jessica Lewis. Congratulations, Jessica Lewis. To honor your accomplishment, we invite Aniki Clark, Communications Lead from the TIU, to present to you a well-deserved token.
And with that, we've come to the end of the quarterfinals of the Public Sector Debate Competition 2026. Join us on the 23rd of June when we get to the semifinals. And those battling out at that time, joining them is the Administrator General's Department. We have the Accountant General's Department, Teaching Service, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. It's been an amazing morning into afternoon. Commiseration, Ministry of Economic Growth and Infrastructure Development. You've come a far way in this competition, and I think you should really take a bow. You've done well. You've done well. It's the nature of the competition, but you went up against a formidable opponent in the ministry, in the Department of Administrator General. They've been a third place winner. Ah! That came fast, right? Second, so they're gunning. So join us in 2 weeks. It's been an amazing morning. Good afternoon, all.
For you only, every word is true. I'm in love with you. Take you as you are, lady. You ain't gotta change for me. Need you from your crown, honey, right down to the sole of your face.